Content warning. This video is not made for kids. It contains fictional depictions of mental illness, fictional violence, and fictional abuse. The fictional characters in this story are heavily afflicted by the things that I have spelled out to you, and some of the inner monologue seems to suggest that they should be getting hurt like this, but that is absolutely not the case. Me portraying this abuse or mental illness is meant to show the audience how the illness or abuse feels inside of the mind of the afflicted person, so they can sympathize and maybe stop themselves from following a similar pattern in the future. Be careful if you're easily triggered. You're most likely about to enter the mind of someone who is heavily afflicted by illness and abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. The ticking of a timer filled the darkness around Gregory, the noise practically imprinting itself on his eardrums. The pace matched the rising pulse in his neck, rapid and stiff. Gregory couldn't remember how he had gotten here, but he didn't need his sight to understand where he was. The distinct smell of cleaning chemicals and rotten garbage crowded in on him, cold cylinders brushing against his sides like icy rods. His cheek was pressed up against the wood of a cabinet door, an outline of faint orange light showing him which way was up and which way was down. Just when Gregory was about to wonder what was happening, he picked up on a sound that the ticking timer could not cover up. The sound of a plastic beak chewing on something. The wet smacks and squelches made his stomach roll with sickness, the smell of stale pizza crust and flat soda leaking in through the cracks in the cabinet door. Gregory's body already knew what to do. He stayed perfectly silent and still, listening as the sound of Chica's desperate frenzy passed from one side of the kitchen to the other. And still, the oven timer continued to tick, marching on and on and on, a dreadful promise that this would be over soon. A smaller voice in the back of his head questioned the situation, questioning how in the world he had gotten back into the pizzaplex. But that voice was drowned out by his instincts, which were telling him to stay still, just stay still, stay quiet, just like you learned how to. Don't breathe, don't move, don't cry. The only reason he ever broke those rules was the unexpected tap, tap, tap of knuckles against glass. Chica's chewing stopped. The knocking hadn't come from her. Gregory strained his ears, trying to figure out what he had just heard. It sounded kind of like it came from the... 4 more knocks, a little louder this time, like it was trying to overpower the constant ticking. Hello? Every muscle in Gregory's body snapped tight. The voice had been muffled, but he would have recognized it anywhere. He opened and closed his mouth, half of him scared of getting caught, while the other half didn't care what would happen if he left his hiding spot. Chills raked down his back as another series of knocks reached out for him, accompanied by a tearful, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Gregory's chest began to heave, his heartbeat following the hurried pace of the timer, the danger of Chica now becoming insignificant. He kicked the cabinet door open, tumbling out onto the freezing tiles, his head whipping back and forth, expecting Chica to lunge down on top of him at any second. Kitchen appliances floated there in the shadows, rearranged and oddly spaced, the sink somewhere on the ceiling with the freezer glued on the wrong wall. Mold everywhere. Still, Gregory could not care less about the state of the kitchen. All that he could focus on was the oven. The fiery glow inside was just as he remembered, covering him like molten gold, making the rest of the world fade away. He couldn't quite see through the glass, its contents hidden by the smoke that billowed like storm clouds inside. The next few knocks were no longer little taps, but instead jarring, desperate bangs. "Help!" somebody cried from inside the oven. "Please let me out, it hurts!" 2 bloody palms pressed up against the oven's glass door. That sight was enough to throw him into action. The smell of burning flesh swept over him as he began yanking on the oven door, pulling with all of his might. It didn't open up as easily as it had the first time, like it was actively resisting his efforts to yank it open. The entire time, the ticking rose and rose in volume, the pounding on the glass door getting louder and more desperate with every second that passed. The smoke was leaking out of the oven now, the smell of burnt hair and scorched clothes filling every single pore on his entire body, sticking to him like a layer of mucus. "Let me out! Let me out! Let me out!" The voice had risen to a scream, the blistering, blackening fingers beating against the glass, desperate to escape the searing heat of the oven. "James! James!" Gregory called to him. I'm here! I'm going to get you out! Just hold on!" The shrieks of pain, the hands clawing at the glass, the sight of bubbling blisters popping and spilling liquefied flesh, so much smoke, and the smell was like burning bacon. And then it all stopped. Gregory fell backwards as he finally managed to wrench the oven door open. The screams were gone now. The timer was the only thing left, the oven wide open, radiating waves upon waves of heat. His whole body shook as he peeled himself off of the floor, lifting his head up above the opened oven door, ready to reach in and drag what remained of James out of there. But he couldn't. James had vanished. The only thing left in his place was a strip of flesh. All that he could hear was the timer, louder and louder and louder in his ears as he stared at the strip, trying to comprehend what exactly he was looking at. His brain just wouldn't accept what he was seeing. He kept trying to understand it, but every time he reached a moment of recognition, it was blown away from him like dust. The texture of the flesh was what really scared him. There were tiny bumps all along the piece of meat, bumps that almost looked like taste buds. The timer dinged. The entire scene dropped out from under him, flinging him into the waking world before he even knew what happened. Gregory kicked against the blankets that had enveloped him, his arms flying up and grabbing at the wall as a reflex to stop his fall. The ringing of the timer was still going on, disorienting him as he tried to distinguish reality from nightmares. He wasn't in his room. He wasn't in his bed. He caught glimpses of a bookshelf, a starry lamp, sunlight slipping through the gaps in the shades that covered the window. His sheets were bundled so tightly around him, he felt like he was tied up in a fishing net, making it pretty clear to him that he must have been writhing around in his sleep. Gregory freed up his arms, sitting up against the headboard, trying to rub the sleepy crust out of his eyes as he adjusted to the new environment. The events of yesterday plowed into him, making him stop breathing for a moment or two. He was going to be living with Miss Anderson from now on. He still hadn't quite accepted that. In fact, he was anticipating his mother to barge in and drag him back home where he would never see the light of day again. But that didn't happen. The timer's ringing finally faded, the aroma of newly cooked breakfast making his mouth water. Sausage, scrambled eggs, biscuits, it all twirled in the air towards him, trying to pull him out of bed. It had been quite a while since he had smelled a meal as good as this. He scooted off the bed and made his way over to the door, only stopping to think when his hand was on the knob. Did Miss Anderson not want him to bother her until she finished eating? What if none of that breakfast was actually for him, and she accused him of trying to steal it from her? This might be a you get to eat my leftovers situation. What if he did something that she didn't like, and she decided that she didn't want to share this cozy home with him after all? Just as he was about to climb back into bed and wait for Miss Anderson to leave, the handle twisted beneath his palm, making him leap back as the door was nudged open. Oh, you're up! Miss Anderson smiled down at him, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Breakfast is ready. Do you want some? He searched her features, trying to find any trace of a slight trick or fake politeness, but he didn't find anything. Yeah, sure, Gregory said, trailing after her as she made her way back around the corner in the direction of the kitchen. He took the chance to make a stop at the bathroom, finishing up his business and using a pre-placed stool to reach the sink. She really had thought of everything. His reflection rose up at the same time that he did, making him stop before he even touched the knobs. Instead, his fingers traced over the scars in his hairline, then the twisted mess that his right ear had become. The new stitches stung, reminding him that he was supposed to be putting ointment on them every day. Even once he covered them in the pale cream, it didn't do much to hide all the extra damage that had been brought down on the recently healed lacerations. He firmly kept his eyes down to the porcelain sink as he washed his hands, trying not to think about the lasting damage his mother might have inflicted as he finally left the bathroom and made his way towards the kitchen. The aroma of fresh food strengthened the closer that he got, welcoming him to step out from the hall. Miss Anderson was already seated at the kitchen table, using a plastic fork to pick through her assortment of sausages, biscuits, and scrambled eggs. "Here, this one's for you," Miss Anderson said, gesturing to the only other plate at the table. He approached cautiously, hyper-aware of every angle of her features. She didn't look eager and ready to catch him breaking a rule. She just took a few sips of milk, as if unbothered by what he was about to do. Gregory kept his head low, sneaking around to the full plate that she had offered him. He took it and cautiously slipped it into his arms, turning back around so he could flee the scene as quickly as possible. Gregory?" Miss Anderson called after him. "Where are you going?" Gregory's knees locked up, peeking over his shoulder, expecting to be met with a glare. Instead, Miss Anderson was just tilting her head, frowning slightly. I'm going to take it to my room," he said slowly, just as confused as she was. "Why would you... Gregory, you don't have to hide in your room," Miss Anderson told him. "You can eat at the table if you want." Gregory teetered between the two options, asking her, "Do you want me to sit at the table?" "You can just do whatever you're comfortable with," Miss Anderson said simply. "If you want to take it back to your room, I guess you can, but you're also welcome to come sit at the table with me instead." Gregory gripped the paper plate a little tighter, taking in the assortment of food in his arms. The sausage was cut up into bite-sized bits, cooked just enough to darken it, but not enough to burn it. The scrambled eggs were the same, puffy and light, much like the buttered biscuit, the entire meal so much more than he felt he deserved. The flash of the nightmare came back, the moment when he had opened the oven. He couldn't remember what he had found inside. A part of him really didn't want to remember either. Even though Gregory was more used to the routine of hiding in his room to eat, he really didn't want to be alone right now. And besides, Miss Anderson's offer seemed genuine enough. Gregory placed his plate back down onto the table, pulling himself up onto the oversized chair, carefully watching Miss Anderson for any changes. She wasn't staring him down or reconsidering how much food she had given him. She just continued to eat her portion, not a hint of recalculation or irritation. So, Gregory began to eat too. This was probably the best breakfast he had ever had in his whole life. Everything that his nose had been telling him was true, and he soon found himself devouring every single speck on his plate. "Careful, go a little slower. I don't want you to choke," Miss Anderson warned him with an amused smile. Gregory tried to do as she said, but ended up licking his plate clean before Miss Anderson had the time to finish her eggs. Just as Gregory began to wash it all down with the milk, they were interrupted by the chime of the doorbell. He nearly spilled the milk all over himself, coughing as he set it back down. His brain naturally leapt to the worst visitor they could possibly have. His mother. Gregory practically fell off the chair, ignoring Miss Anderson's surprised yelp as he skidded around the kitchen and hid behind the stove. Miss Anderson's chair squealed as it was pushed out as well, and she whispered to him, Gregory, it's all right. You don't have to do that." The doorbell was jabbed several more times, the impatience clear even through the oak wood. I'll get it," Miss Anderson offered, following the noise. She seemed to pause at the door for a second, possibly checking through the peephole. She sighed in frustration, which only stressed him out even more. Gregory pressed his back into the cabinet doors that lined up beside the stove, clamping both of his hands over his nose and mouth to keep quiet. Not long after he had gotten control of himself, the front door swung open. "Oh, good morning! You're Crystal Anderson, correct?" Gregory's chest deflated and he dropped his hands down to his knees. He recognized the voice. It was definitely not his mother. Yes, Miss Anderson cleared her throat. What is all this? Well, Gregory Cooper is now living with you, right? The excited voice rambled on. It only just got out that his mother was doing some pretty deplorable things behind closed doors, so we came here to ask for an interview. An interview? Well, yes. The reporter gave a laugh that was more of a cackle. We could pay you for your trouble if you're willing to give us some time with him on set. At first, Gregory thought that he knew exactly what was about to happen. He lowered his head, the stitches of his ear biting him harder, trying to prepare himself for the ordeal that he thought that he had been done with already. No, thank you. Gregory snapped his head back up, stunned for a few moments. What do you mean by that? The reporter stammered, her delight faltering slightly. Well, I mean no, Miss Anderson repeated. Thank you for the offer, but I don't think Gregory wants to talk about it. But... The reporter was cut off as the front door was shut on her face, which sent a thrill of relief through Gregory. Gregory, it's all right. She's gone. You can come out now, Miss Anderson called softly. Gregory crawled out on all fours, leaning around the stove. Miss Anderson was sitting down at the table once again, her kind smile perking back up as if the exchange hadn't happened at all. The doorbell rang a few more times, but Miss Anderson completely ignored it, telling him, It's okay, Gregory. I'm not going to let them in anytime soon. I don't want to make you repeat the story more times than you have to. Gregory blinked a few times, still catching up with what had just happened. He got up, finding himself settling back down in his chair, tracing his thumb over the drops of condensation that slid down the side of his glass. The doorbell tried again 2 more times after that, but eventually the reporters seemed to give up, their shadows disappearing from the drawn curtain. The last part Miss Anderson said stuck out to him like a broken ankle, her clarification rolling around inside of his head as he let the meaning behind it sink in. More than I have to? Gregory was aware of the pathetic squeak in his voice, but he could do nothing to stop it. Miss Anderson paused, abandoning the last bite of her sausage. I'm so sorry, Gregory. I'm not really sure how I'm going to tell you this. I know it's going to be rough on you, but... She sighed, folding her hands over the tablecloth with an anxious grin. You're going to have to tell the police officers all of the bad things that your mother has done to you. She let him digest that information for a moment, giving him the chance to say, I have to... what? Crystal stayed on her side of the kitchen, explaining to him, Your mother, the way that she's been treating you, it's wrong. It's illegal, actually. Gregory gaped at her for a few seconds, recalling how the policeman had taken pictures of his injuries before and after the doctors fixed him up. Illegal? Yes, Miss Anderson went on. She's going to get in a whole lot of trouble for hurting you, and you won't ever be left in her care again. But to make sure that she doesn't come back, you're going to have to do your best to explain to the police the sort of things that she does to you. She started stroking the braids in her brown and turquoise hair, making an effort to retain eye contact. It's probably going to be really scary for you, but it is really, really important that your mother doesn't get away with this. Do you understand? Gregory just found himself staring at the half-empty glass of milk, watching the condensation droplets trickle down to form a damp ring on the tablecloth. Illegal. That part was messing him up. It was illegal to hurt him? But he thought his mom was able to do all of that to him because she's his mom. She birthed him. He slept under her roof, so she got to do whatever she wanted with him. Again, the news report about the animatronic's abuse drifted past. Abuse. He was slowly beginning to understand the true definition of that word. Oh, no, it's okay. Miss Anderson pulled a few napkins out of the holder in the middle of the table, passing it over to him. Gregory hadn't even realized he'd been crying until the tears were already dripping onto his empty plate. He tried to cover his face with the wad of napkins, blindly feeling his way around as he slipped out of his chair. I'm sorry, I'll try to stop, he whimpered, a new surge of terror overcoming him. No, Gregory, it's okay, you don't have to stop. Miss Anderson's voice made him slow down, but he still continued to rub at his irritated eyes. Once he peeked out from behind the wadded napkin, Miss Anderson was approaching him carefully, her hands tucking close to her face with an expression of worry rather than annoyance. It's perfectly okay for you to cry, Gregory, she said, seeming astonished. This is going to be really stressful for you. You don't need to be ashamed about crying. Gregory was struck by how backwards his new home worked. I'm still sorry, he sniffled, trying to clean himself up as fast as possible. You don't have to do it today if you don't feel like you're ready, Miss Anderson piped up. She didn't put her hands on him, she didn't crowd him and snap at him. She was only offering him a bundle of actual tissues this time, bending low to try and take up the least amount of space as possible. What? You don't have to give your testimony right now, Miss Anderson said. I'll call the authorities and tell them that you're not ready yet. You can just rest in bed today if you want. Actually, getting a choice in this matter was absolutely baffling to him. Still, though, the longer that he stayed out in the open in such a vulnerable state, the more he longed for the warm comfort of his new blankets. Do you want to go back to bed? Miss Anderson asked. Mm-hmm. Gregory nodded. Okay, you can go back to bed then. Miss Anderson backed off, returning to her spot at the kitchen table. Today you can just relax and settle down a little more. If you need anything, just ask, all right? I'll be there right away. Thank you, ma'am, Gregory croaked out, falling out of sight behind the corner. I'm sorry. You didn't do anything wrong, Miss Anderson called after him as he slid the door to his new room shut. You were so brave yesterday, Gregory. You deserve to have a little break. Entry 1, March 13th, 2061. We have promising results. It took 13 failed subjects, but we were eventually able to stabilize the 14th donor. Subject 1, as we've named him, is the first to survive the harvesting and awakening procedure. It can be done. When he was woken up, he didn't respond to any stimuli for 3 days and nights, but he remained stable through all of that time. By hour 78, his eyes followed movements of a flashlight, and he flinched in response to a popping balloon. By hour 89, he began to move his body and started to practice walking. By hour 172, he was able to communicate and asked questions of where am I, who are all of you, and what's happening, as well as comments of it's cold, I can't feel my face, and where is my skin. It was unsettling, but I don't really blame him. He must be so confused right now. Unfortunately, when the situation and his condition was explained, he claimed to have no recollection of anything before this. When exposed to familiar stimuli, there was still no recognition. He is struggling to adjust to his new body because of how large it is. The systems and machinery that keep him alive take up an entire small room, so we unfortunately had to build his new body around that obstruction. It is recommended that we find a way to give the next successful subject a more compact humanoid form. Victor Miller. Yay! More happy stuff! Well, I mean, not at the beginning, but, you know. So, also, another miracle has occurred. I did 2 episodes in a row on time. So just because of that, remember to like and comment and all of that good stuff, because it really helps me in the algorithm, and I super duper appreciate it. It helps me get other stuff out quicker. So thank you so much with all of that help and stuff. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for getting this far into the series. Hopefully the next episode will come out in 2 weeks as it is scheduled to. I don't want to jinx it, but that is the plan. So hopefully 2 weeks from now, another episode will come out and we will get a three episode upload streak of things going right. So anyway, bye guys. Thank you for liking, commenting, all of that, engaging and stuff. Thank you. Love you guys so much. Bye. Thank you.